Maybe for the benefit of people in the audience who don't understand it, you could explain Cookie Puss.
Well, Cookie Puss was, it's explained in the movie, but it was a commercial that Carvel.
And maybe you could explain Carvel ice cream.
Carvel was ice cream.
Some of the worst ice, yeah.
Yeah, and the guy, Tom Carvel, there's actually a lot of we were in that car shooting that scene, there's a lot of Ben doing basically every character that Carvel, and doing Tom Carvel had a very deep voice.
Tom Carvel.
And then Cookie Puss, it was all this. It always seemed like the same imprint every cake, right?
That's
it was
right.
like the whale was just turned this way,
and
Cookie Puss,
Right.
And
Fudgy the Whale.
Fudgy the Whale, and then and Cookie Puss was sort of a standard, but then St. Patrick's Day, which is I guess
today.
Today, so
yeah.
Cookie Opus is relevant. I don't know. Is Carvel still around?
I don't know.
Anyway, but Cookie Opus is probably someone's having it right now.
Yeah. So when you were young and you conceived of this autobiographical trilogy, was it always your intention to end with a scene at Lincoln Center?
Yes.
Okay.
It's all deliberate.
Yeah. I'm guessing that you don't spend a lot of time going back and watching your films, but it's interesting to think about the span of your life and the span of your work in film. And think of all three films together. How do they seem differently to you when you consider them now?
Well, because I haven't seen them. I mean, this one obviously I've seen most recently because I had to finish it for right now. But
for tonight.
For tonight,
yeah.
Well, roughly. I mean, I haven't seen any of them since they came out, and except Kicking and Screaming, I watched when we did the DVD for Criterion. I watched it again. So I don't have a lot of perspective on it, except that it's stuff I did, and so I stand by it, and I'm proud of the movies. But I don't, in terms of how they relate to one another, I'm not so sure really.
That's for somebody else to decide.
Yeah.
This particular film is obviously reflecting a different moment in your life, and I'm just wondering about how you. It's such a great rapport that you have with the actors in this movie. It's something really beautiful with all of them. And did you start with casting Ben?
Yeah, I had Ben in mind when I was writing it. After Greenberg, I actually started writing this initially after Greenberg, and I was thinking, it'd be nice to do something again with Ben, and something that part was awfully different. That character is very different than Ben as a person, and also Ben even as a kind of what you've seen Ben do before. And I loved his performance in that movie, but I felt like maybe there's a way to do something that felt sort of that kind of used the Ben sort of comic iconography in a way that I could work it into my world, and so I was thinking of him while writing this, which is not often the case. And then after, I actually ended up making Francis before I made this, and then I worked with Adam Driver, and I felt like casting Adam in a way kind of made sense of the movie to me, because it was, I never want, obviously we're having fun with it, but I also felt like I never wanted to sell Ben's character out. I wanted you to understand why he'd fall for this guy, and I felt like having Adam Driver in that part made sense of that.
Mm-hmm. I feel like there's a really special quality to the performance, like a really super physical, go for broke thing, especially in Naomi Watts's performance, maybe.
Yeah, Naomi is, she's great, and I always thought she was really funny and she doesn't do a lot of.
No.
But I always felt there's humor in a lot of what she does, and I mean, starting with Mulholland Drive, there's a lot of humor in that performance, even though it's intense. And Huckabee, she was really funny, and so I always felt like you needed somebody when you go into that hip hop scene where you kind of would be surprised by it. I mean, like that it wouldn't feel like here we go. If it was a comedian in a kind of straight way, you'd kind of expect this is going to be funny.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, it's more surprising with her, you know, even though, but she's, you know, she's brilliant at it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it makes an interesting contrast with Adam Driver because he's so big, and the whole lunging, with the big hugs going down on people, it's a very,
Yeah, Adam is, everything he does is interesting.
Yeah.
And we talked about how he was kind of like water. That was sort of our idea for him, that he both kind of could slip between people, but he could also just engulf you. You know, he was sort of, in that way he would, hold his hands, and and he just lives for that stuff. He just loves to have a thing, and then will surprise you 100 times, within that thing.
Mm. I also have an idea that maybe there's it's a kind of a common narrative, I guess, sort of self-righteous movies where people uncover something about somebody that they think is likable, and then the truth is revealed. But then what you're doing is you're kind of taking that apart and saying, ending in a very surprising way.
Right. And then taking that tradition that is tried and true, and
the Lifetime Channel tradition,
throwing it against the wall. Well, I kind of arrived at that almost sort of in the same order that you see it in the movie. I kind of wrote Ben's sort of
denunciation.
Yeah, his righteousness and everything, and invested in it, and then kind of came up to the point of where he has to sort of reveal Jamie to Grodin and everybody, and it just felt like that's what would probably happen.
Yeah.
Whether I wanted it to or not. And I felt like, but I also thought there was I always sort of suspected there was like a dormant thriller running underneath this entire movie, and sometimes it would kind of rise to the surface and show itself, and then you'd kind of knock it back down, and because, and then Ben's character, because he's so invested in, in what I think he doesn't quite know, but this sort of notion of discovery for him is so important, and he decides it's this, and that for those minutes, it could be maybe 8 minutes or so, it could be like a thriller.
Right. You were discovering your inner David Fincher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, although I didn't make it as yellow.
Ooh. Speaking of the color yellow, making movies yellow, was this shot on film?
No, it was shot on the Alexa.
Yeah.
I guess also if I was my real inner Fincher, I would have had them make me a camera and shot it on that.
Right. Yeah. But how long have you been shooting on the Alexa? You shot Francis Ha.
I shot Francis Ha on actually a Canon 5D, which is a kind of just consumer camera.
Right.
And then
Mistress America.
Mistress America, which
has yet to be released.
Will come after this, but was shot just before this actually. I shot these last two on the Alexa.
Yeah. How do you like it in contrast to film?
I mean, it's a complicated thing. I mean, I like very much how these movies look. It's also, film. The problem with film. I mean, when I made Margot, we shot. I shot Greenberg on film too, but Greenberg I color timed digitally.
Right.
Margot I shot on film, and this is already like 2006
with Harris CDs, right?
and 7 with Harris, and we at the time people were still shooting on film more. It was there were more people shooting on film, but still most people were color timing digitally, which is, for people who don't know, you shoot on film and then you scan it and then you color time it digitally and then you film it back out. So in a way, this sort of notion of film and digital, I feel like has been lost for quite some time without it really even being discussed, because we've been once you're changing the color digitally, I feel like you're already out of a photochemical.
And the end product has been a DCP as opposed to a print.
And then and then now you have a DCP, which is, but the Margot we color timed on film. So, and it took forever, and they didn't have the infrastructure for it. And this is now, a few years ago. And from that point forward, it just makes it harder and harder, certainly if you don't have a huge budget to do it on film. I mean, New York actually just closed we made a few film prints of While We're Young, and Technicolor just closed their film lab. So now, if you shoot on film in New York City, it's like shooting. You might as well be shooting on location.
You've got to farm it out to LA.
Yeah, so you won't see your dailies for 2 or 3 days, and it's like shooting. If you're shooting somewhere remote, and you have to get your the old days. So I don't know. All this is to say, I feel like in a way I almost feel like I can't have an opinion anymore, because I'd love to be shooting on film, and I prefer it, but I think for a lot of reasons it just makes it very difficult. That said, I would like to shoot on film again before it really is done.
Yeah. Take questions from the audience. Anybody brave enough to raise their hand? Yes.
I thought it was interesting. I really enjoyed the film. That you used a quote in the beginning, kind of a lot. It wasn't just one quote, but you really required the audience to be patient. And I just wondered what you're thinking, if you were nervous about doing that, or what the thinking was about it. I had forgotten about it till the very end, and my husband then said, "Oh, it's just like the quote." And I had to go back and think about it. So, yeah.
A generally approving comment about the movie, and a more pointed comment about the quote that opens the movie. And was Noah nervous about using
nervous for me in the beginning, where you're like, "Oh no."
Reading.
Yeah. Really. Yeah, actually, when we were mixing the movie, and when you mix a movie, you have to watch sections over and over again, because you're working on the sound and everything. And every time we were in the beginning of the movie, I kept doing a character from the audience, just being like, "Oh God, really? We have to read this stupid play?" Yeah, I don't know. I felt like it was too good not to use. I mean, I saw the performance that I mean, I don't know if anyone here was lucky enough to see Wally Shawn and Andre Gregory, who did a performance of The Master Builder, which they've been doing for years. I think they work on these things, if you've seen, the Vanya on 42nd Street, that they.
There was a film made of that
and
production.
And there was a film also
that
that Demi made of this production. And I saw it in, they do it in unlikely places, so I saw it in a townhouse in the West Village, and it was just it was just so good. And it was Wally's translation, and when I heard that exchange, I was just like, and I'd already written the script. I'd like to say, I've always been interested in Ibsen, and this was my Ibsen, my conversation with Ibsen, but it wasn't. I just, when I heard that exchange, I thought, well, that's great, and that sort of says and I like how dramatic it is, and then I made the connection with the Paul McCartney song, which I also like very much, and probably more had in my head beforehand than the Ibsen. So, yeah, they kind of bookend the movie, but thanks for worrying about me. I really wanted to come up with a profession that would be visual, and something that you could see, and you could kind of see not only what they did, but also, obviously they have to collaborate and go to a place, and it's a physical act in a way, which, that was my initial idea, was sort of what would that be, and I started thinking about documentary film in that way. But by choosing that, obviously, I was aware of all the sort of. There was a lot that was baked into that idea and that profession, and that. So I felt like there were arguments I had to kind of have, and but in a way, I feel like documentary is almost like, I think I'm using this wrong, but it's kind of like a MacGuffin in the movie. I mean, it isn't really about documentary. It's a movie about a marriage. I felt like my responsibility was, to sort of tell the story of this marriage and resolve that to the point that I could resolve it, and all the other stuff was kind of there to to bring kind of interesting and sort of fun elements into it, and to bring up these sort of arguments and questions, but I wasn't going to be the one to try to answer them.
The ethics of documentary. Yeah, in the back.
Wes and I are very close. We've had, I think, he's always been an influence on me. Just, I didn't think about anything particular with this movie. I mean, a lot of what I was doing in this movie, I think probably, in terms of the camera and the score and the sort of vibe of it, was kind of a continuation of things that I was exploring in Frances Ha, which is a movie I made before. But, Wes is, it's like, it's hard to say what the sort of, how your friends have an influence on you if you're, or family, you're so close to these people.
But that's, actually that raises another question, which is, you talked about filmmakers that you admire, and, the common perception is that you see a film and then you sort of like create a film in its image, or you sort of model yourself after the filmmaker, but that doesn't, I think that that's not really the way that it works for most people, and that it's filtered in all different kinds of mysterious ways. And so I wonder, for you, what does that mean to you, the films that have used the term that's very common, influenced you?
Well, I remember when I made Kicking and Screaming, which is my first movie, which I guess was shown here, right? Yeah. Today, yeah. Yay. I had so many ideas of what I wanted to do. I mean, I felt like, I was 24 when I made that movie, and I was like, I like this kind of movie and this kind of movie, and I'm gonna do, and I really felt like and probably what works about the movie and what probably doesn't work about the movie is that it has all of that in there, and it's like bursting with influence and ideas, and I'm going to do this, all these things. And I think what happens the more, as you do it more, and certainly for me, these things kind of start filtering in different ways, and you don't really think about it anymore. And like now, if I look at a movie before I'm about to shoot, it's usually for very specific reasons, for technical, this person did this way, or like we've got a party scene. What are some good party scenes? I think a lot about like I remember for Squid and the Whale, like the sort of major thing in my head was in All the President's Men. Robert Redford had like black socks with brown shoes, and it kind of it had a real impact. I just loved how that, and I felt like that's kind of what I want to do in this movie,
No, but that's the kind of detail that actually.
Those are the things that I end up, which are very hard to answer then in Q&As or interviews.
It was the black socks and the brown shoes.
Yeah, because
of Alan Pakula.
You get nervous titters from the audience, but that's sort of what it is now for me, and whereas when I was younger, it was everything.
Yeah.
Well, I thought that they were making things. I wanted them. There was a kind of artisanal thing going on there, which is obviously a thing, and right, and I mean, in a way, with all of that stuff, I felt like I couldn't try to actually follow what's going on in Brooklyn right now, where I was gonna, by the time I drove up here for this Q&A, it would all be different. And so I was sort of coming up with my own ideas of what might be. Like I actually saw someone rollerblading today, and I thought, oh, that's maybe a good sign, because I don't know if people are rollerblading or not, but I felt like they're gonna be. They were when I was a kid, and so that was sort of we kind of like Jamie and Darby's wardrobes. Jamie particularly's wardrobe was kind of influenced by the Eric Romer movie La Collectionneuse, which is a movie from the late '60s, and Adam kind of looks like Patrick Bachot, who's in that movie, and that sort of buttoning up to the top, and so the ice cream kind of came out of that. It was like, I've heard of people making ice cream. It's not like I, totally imagined that. It came to me in a dream. But
another MacGuffin.
Yeah, it's another MacGuffin. Well, the ice cream is a MacGuffin. That's probably, I'm using it right.
Yeah, there you go.
But yeah, then I thought, well, let's, it would be, let's make it a plot point, which for me is a big thing to have a plot point.
Yep.
I mean, it sort of starts, I guess, when Ben first sees the ice cream and says, blow it up. That's, Well, I don't know that it is a bit of a shift, but I feel like it's still, for me anyway, it's still part of the, it's, Ben feels strongly about it, and he's there to, and I did sort of think of Adam in that time as like a supervillain, with this cloak, it's sort of wearing the way he wears it, and Adam totally went for that thing, and the way they walk, and he backs up, and James Murphy's score there is like it's almost like a Michael Mann movie for a second, and I don't know, I just wanted to have fun with that. I felt like the movie could hold it, and I felt like in Ben's head, these are the stakes. These are the stakes. The stakes are like an Alan Bacula movie, or The Insider, or one of these. That this is really important to him, and I felt like the movie, in a way, was flexible, and it could go that direction. Because also knowing what was going to come once they get inside the other room and he lays it out for everybody, we're kind of arriving with a thud back to the movie that we maybe briefly, left. I felt like ultimately these sort of anxieties of middle age and these sort of thoughts of middle age are things that are not specific to now, but because this movie takes place now, I felt like I needed to engage in technology and what its role in our lives, and at least in some way. And I was just trying to be funny with the montage. I mean, it seemed, once I had that idea, it just seemed funny to me that would be, that the older people would be addicted to the newer technology. But I don't know. I feel like you did a really good job talking about it, and anything I say is just going to sound like I'm just going to regurgitate you back to you. So, but I appreciate you asking a smart question. Well, Adam's a friend of mine, and I really, Adam had acted when he was younger, and I really thought he was really good, and so I actually thought of him for Greenberg, for a part that Risa Fons played. It was his friend, Ben's friend in Greenberg, and I reached out to Adam, and the timing wasn't right, and he wasn't available, and I just felt like if he ever wanted to act again, I was hoping it would be with me, and I was more aware later in casting it, because I really cast him because I thought he'd be the best person for it. He's so dry, and I mean, what's amazing is how soft-spoken Adam is. Like, the sound guy kept coming up to me and saying, "Can you ask him to speak up?" Which, and I was thinking, like, he's so loud when he performs, But, and the answer was no, I would not ask him to speak. But, I think he's just terrific, and he's so, there's something very moving about his performance, and I think, the sort of resonance of then thinking, well, God, the Beastie Boys are middle age, and Ad Rock is now got a kid. That is, there's poignance sort of baked into that, but I didn't think of it until later.
We'll do a couple more. Yeah.
I don't know, I haven't thought of it like that. I mean, I think Ben, the thing I'll say about Ben, Adam, and I is that we all grew up in New York and with creative parents, and I think there's and roughly the same time, and I think there's a kind of sensibility we share beyond whatever else that our friendship holds, and so. I do find them familiar in that way, and so when I think about people and to sort of be in my movies, it feels like I can see it in a way that maybe I couldn't see it as clearly yet with somebody else, and that's a nice thing, and it's a nice thing to sort of have friends that you can work with and kind of find ways to communicate what you're trying to communicate, so I'm not sure you're using Avatar right, or I think I'm using MacGuffin wrong. You're using MacGuffin right, but I don't know how I would call him my avatar. They're awfully fun to work with. I remember showing Kicking and Screaming to somebody. It was actually one of the I think it was one of the financiers of it, and he said, it was like, the first cut I showed, and he said, you don't actually have to show people walk through the door. And I thought, but that's kind of what this movie's about, is about, walking through the door. But maybe that's what you're responding to, that those movies had a more leisurely pace than maybe the last few have had. But I don't know. I mean, I kind of cut movies to my sort of inner rhythm and what feels right for the material, but also feels right to me in terms of the storytelling. I mean, in some ways, I think probably Frances or Margot are cut sort of more aggressively than this one is. Whatever that means, but so I don't know. But I mean, if you're laughing, that's good.
So you got another one ready, Mistress America.
Mistress America,
which is at Sundance, coming out later in the year. And are you writing now?
I'm writing now, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So. Sorry to disturb you from your writing process.
My pleasure.
But thanks for coming, and thank you all
Thanks
for coming.
Having me.